Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
I think one of the more shocking things to come out of this horrific terrorist attack against innocent men, women, children, even babies in Israel is the reaction in America. Academia in particular has been repulsive. I mean, to watch Harvard University have 31 ignorant separate groups blame Israel and Israel alone, the victim of terrorism, for what happened. They're responsible. And of course, these universities that are so woke and so politically correct that you can't say anything about any group of people. Well, you actually can. You can attack African-American conservatives. And apparently you could support Hamas terrorists over innocent victims that are Jewish because they've allowed that to happen. Here's a quick reminder of what went on around our college campuses recently.
Glory to the martyrs! Glory to the martyrs!
What has Hamas done? Hamas has shifted the balance of power. Hamas has punctured the illusion of invincibility. That's what they've done. You don't have to be a Hamas supporter to recognize that. Hamas has changed the terms of debate. The Israeli officials are right. Nothing will be the same again. Nothing will be the same again. Hamas has challenged the monopoly of violence. And in those first few hours, even as horrific acts were being carried out, many of which we would not learn about until later, there are many Gazans of goodwill, many Palestinians conscious who abhor violence, as do you, as do I, who abhor the targeting of civilians, as do you, as do I, who were able to breathe. They were able to breathe for the first time in years. It was exhilarating. It was exhilarating. It was energizing. And if they weren't exhilarated by this challenge to the monopoly of violence, by this shifting of the balance of power, then they would not be human. I was exhilarated.
From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! No peace or stolen land! No peace or stolen land! There is only one solution! There is only one solution! Anti-polar revolution! Anti-polar revolution! There is only one solution! There is only one solution! Anti-polar revolution! Anti-polar revolution!
Sound like a bunch of, dead-minded zombies. Glory to the martyrs, exhilarating, inspiring, energizing. What, killing innocent men, women, children, babies, beheading them, raping women, taking hostages? Really? That's exhilarating to these idiots on college campuses? From the river to the sea. You know what that means, right? That means basically wiping Israel off the map. That's what that means. Anti-Fatah revolution. What does that mean? They want to wipe Israel off the map. Hamas's charter calls for the elimination of Israel. We know, and this is the stupidity that is your president, Joe Biden. The Palestinians aren't going to get this aid money. They didn't get the UN aid money. How do you think they were able to afford building this elaborate network of tunnels? The ones that you can see on my website that I was inside of. Well, because they used humanitarian aid from the U.S., from Israel, from other countries. Instead of building infrastructure, schools and hospitals, no, they were building terror tunnels to kill Israelis and to plot, plan, and scheme, the next attack on Israel. Unbelievable. Anyway, how do you explain this? Nicholas Giordano is with us, Campus Reform Higher Education Fellow, Professor of Political Science at Suffolk Community College, to discuss, the strange placement of over $8 billion in universities, American universities and colleges. A lot of this money is Middle Eastern money. Well, have they bought into the radicalism that they're accepting money from countries that have associations with radicalism and radical groups? Anyway, Nicholas Giordano, let's first get your reaction to, and that was only a small sampling of some of the things said on college campuses since October 7th.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean. And my profession should be embarrassed and ashamed of itself, given what we're seeing. But nobody should be surprised. At Campus Reform, we've been warning about the increasing radicalization that we're seeing on college campuses throughout the country. And we did just report on the billions of dollars that are being transferred from Arab countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, directly to American universities. And our Congress should immediately investigate whether this money is being used to fund some of these protests and the student groups. Because let's be honest, when you watch these protests, these are pro-Hamas protests. These students are coming out, they're holding signs by any means necessary, they're using paragliders as symbols, and so it's in support of Hamas. They're basically calling for a second Holocaust, as you alluded to, from the river to the sea. So it amazes me that there's not stricter reporting requirements when they are receiving this foreign money, but the scary part is, I don't think professors and students need to be paid to express their anti-Semitism, to express anti-Israeli sentiment, and quite frankly, anti-American sentiment that we routinely see on college campuses. It's a dangerous place we find ourselves in when higher education is producing radicals, not people that are going to contribute and make society better, but producing radical extremists to push a political agenda.
You see, it's not just universities either. You saw the massive protest in Times Square. I mean, I didn't see the whole crowd, but it looked almost as packed from what I could see on TV as New Year's Eve in Times Square. Over 100,000 people showing up, supporting Hamas in London. In Australia, they're chanting, gas the Jews, F the Jews, gas the Jews, F the Jews. What's that all about?
Well, a big part of our problem is that here in the United States, the university campuses have deemed the concept of the melting pot as biased, as discriminatory. We can't tell people that are coming to this country that they must assimilate into American culture and adopt American values. They pretend and have this myth that diversity is our strength, but realistically, assimilation is our strength. Unfortunately, they cater to these groups, and we see this diversity, equity, inclusion phenomenon where they want to divide the groups, pit the groups against each other, and this is the result of that. We're not educating students. Our education system has collapsed a long time ago, and we've been warning about that. What we're producing is political activists to push a far-left radical agenda.
Yeah, well, and they're pretty successful at it. What do you make of these endowments? Harvard, I read $37+ billion in endowment money, and yet they're trying to raise money for the mental health of the kids that signed on to this insanity that they were blaming Israel and Israel only, and now they're having mental health issues as a result of it, and they want donations. Why doesn't Harvard tap into that little endowment fund of theirs, and why don't they pay for it?
Absolutely. I mean, why do the taxpayers have to be responsible, particularly for private universities? Why do we have to fund things like that? And when you look at the public monies going into the university system, we have to question whether the investment is really worth it at this point. I mean, if our students aren't being educated and we see employers moving away from four-year programs because they realize the quality of students that are being produced, well, why do we keep funding this monstrosity of a higher education system? Academia exists to pursue truth. It exists for open debate, free speech, and yet these are all things that the university system has moved against. They now target special groups like conservatives. They target Jews. They target anyone who dissents from a particular political narrative, yet they still want our tax dollars. And I think a lot of parents are reconsidering where they're sending their children to these colleges, and I'm glad that the donors have finally stepped up. They should have stepped up long ago when we started to see the anti-American sentiment, but it's nice to see the donors start to cut back their donations because that will get the attention of the university leadership. It will get the attention of the Board of Trustees, and it will force a change in behavior of what we're witnessing on these college campuses.
It's really, really bad. When they had this day of jihad, and maybe I'm being petty here in terms of semantics, that's what Hamas called for. They wanted a day of jihad, and I know you remember that. The former Hamas leader called for it, and said for Muslims and others all around the world to protest out there in support of, quote, Palestine. And this goes to the issue of aid money going to the Palestinian people, humanitarian aid, as Joe Biden calls it. But they're not going to get a penny of that money. That money's going to go straight in the pocket of Hamas, because Hamas, is they're the elected leaders of Gaza. And so, I mean, it's just a waste of money from my perspective. But and then you see the day of jihad, and then all of a sudden the media decides to call it a day of rage. Who decided that they didn't want to use the actual terms that were called for by the former Hamas leader? Why did they change the name of that? Or is that just me being peculiar and picky?
No, you're 100% spot on. And listen, I mean, the reality is that nobody has done more damage and harm to Palestinians than Hamas. We have to be honest. Hamas, Palestine and Gaza has received tens of billions in aid over the course of the last decade. They're right on the Mediterranean. With all that money, they could have built out an infrastructure, but instead they built tunnels. They built munitions. They built weaponry to attack innocent people, men, women, and children. And I want to remind the audience that 32 Americans were killed in these attacks. And yet you have the media that's sitting there trying to provide cover from Hamas. Listen, this isn't hard. It shouldn't be hard to muster up a condemnation of a group that killed over 1,400 innocent women, children, and babies. That's not a difficult thing to do, yet they twist themselves into a pretzel trying to defend it, trying to justify it. It is astonishing. I never thought I would see that in the United States.
I didn't think I'd see it either, but we're seeing it. Anyway, we appreciate your time, Professor. Nicholas Giordano, Campus Reform Higher Education Fellow, Professor of Political Science at Suffolk Community College. I think I'd rather my kids get educated by guys like you than these ivory towers of elitism that are beyond woke at this point. They're now just corrupt, and their sensibilities have been offended because Wall Street firms are like, we'd like to know who believes in this radicalism so we don't hire them. And all of a sudden that has put them in a state of panic. All of a sudden, I guess after they graduate, then they want to become rich capitalists. Appreciate you being with us.
When things go sideways, you want to be prepared. Protect you and your family. And people are concerned. They might have to go for a long time without food, electricity. That's why I want to introduce you to 4patriots.com. Get preparedness products you could use now, and that could save your life later. My favorite is 4Patriots' new solar generator, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, even run your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. Or you can pick up one of 4Patriots' best-selling survival food kits. Delicious tasting and designed to last for 25 years. They even have kits with real meat. And if the power's out, no worries. Just boil water over a fire, simmer, and serve. You're going to enjoy a hot meal and stay safe in a crisis. More smart people than ever are finding 4Patriots. Over 2 million customers trust them, and you might have even seen them on TV. I had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/PAS so that listeners of this podcast can see this week's discounts and deals before they go away. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS, but you gotta hurry because the deals don't last long. So save more money, get peace of mind, and protect you and your family. Go to 4patriots.com/PAS.
Welcome back. The attack on Israel by Hamas and the outbursts of protests taking place within our own borders is a reminder that anti-Semitism exists everywhere, including on college campuses. And with great thanks to John and his colleagues reporting over on justthenews.com, we continue to dissect how and why that might be. And one reason that's come to light in the last few weeks is the sum of money that Arab nations are donating, just pouring into universities, especially Ivy League schools. Nicholas Giordano can shine more light on this issue. He's a Campus Reform Higher Education Fellow and Political Science Professor. Nicholas, it's an honor to have you back on. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Anti-Semitism, like I said, it exists in every sector. We have these hundreds of celebrities who have signed on to this letter supporting Palestinians. It obviously exists in higher education. Almost half of Americans can't name a single concentration camp or ghetto. But in the universities, that is your space. That is your wheelhouse. How on earth, aside from the funding, because we're going to get into that in a moment, how on earth has that culture been able to become such a heavy cancer on college campuses?
Well, since 2009 at Campus Reform, we've been reporting on the increased radicalization that's taking place on college campuses throughout the country. And so it shouldn't come as a shock to anyone. It certainly didn't come as a shock to me. And I think it's disgraceful that you have students and professors that can't even muster up a simple condemnation of a terrorist organization like Hamas when they slaughter innocent women, children, and babies. So it speaks volumes. But what we've been witnessing is this deep anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and anti-American campaign that exists on college campuses throughout the country, where they try and blame all the world's ills on the United States and countries like Israel, rather than actually hold accountability where it needs to be, which is Hamas. I mean, let's be honest. The Palestinian suffering is through Hamas. Hamas has been the one that has harmed Palestinians more than any one nation, one group, or one person. And the fact that these students are actually defending Hamas, screaming, "Hail to the martyrs," holding vigils for terrorists, is really disgraceful. And it speaks volumes. I mean, it makes me embarrassed as part of academia that we're witnessing this on our college campuses.
There has been two trends. When I talk to world leaders, they are literally flabbergasted that this goes on. They ask me this question all the time: how are you turning out generations of students that are anti-American and anti-Israel? And I think some of it we're starting to get a real good glimpse of. We see China pouring in tons of money into U.S. curriculum, even all the way now down in the school districts in Omaha or in Nebraska and other places. And at the same time, billions of dollars from Arab states aligned with Hamas into the university system, particularly Ivy League. I think Qatar, which harbors a lot of the Hamas leaders, over $1.6 billion in the last 4 years alone to U.S. education. Are we just allowing our universities to have a foreign-funded propaganda machine right amongst us?
Well, this is something that should concern every American, because where there's billions of dollars, there's going to be influence peddling going on. And Will Biani just put a greater report out on Campus Reform highlighting the tens of billions of dollars that are flowing from countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait to American universities. Now, it's important to understand that the Arab countries do not have the sophistication of the Chinese apparatus, the espionage and influence campaign that they're doing on college campuses. But we do need Congress to investigate, where is this money going? What's this money used for? And are these Arab governments pushing anti-American or anti-Israel sentiments on these campuses? Who's funding these student groups? Is money going towards them? This is something that should have been investigated years ago. And it's actually a simple fix, right? It's a legislative fix. Congress can ban these institutions from taking the money, or they could put in stricter reporting requirements. When I held the security clearance, I had to report every single encounter I ever had with a foreign national. And we're talking detailed reports. Why don't universities have to do the same thing? Report the foreign contacts they have and what the money's going to.
Good point.
Nicholas, there's something else that I've witnessed among your generation of students, Gen Z, and it's with respect to internet journalism, because 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, when you still had physical newspapers, it seems like there was a lot more editing and fact-checking before something went to print. But as we saw over the last 48 hours, the hospital bombing and the misattribution of that, for your students, it seems like they see something like that and they run with it. And even if there's a correction, even if there is a footnote at the bottom that says this story has been updated, they don't see that because they are internet journalism consumers. So different from a newspaper where this would be fact checked for hours before it went to print, this just gets out there immediately and they run with it.
They do, but it's not just them. I mean, let's look at our print media here in the United States also ran on it, and some haven't even made the right corrections yet, admitting that they shouldn't have rushed to put this story out there until they had many more details. Now, it's instant news that you get, so they want to be the first to report it out there. But my students and I were having a conversation today about the idea of truth. I mean, journalism is about truth and getting to the truth so that we don't have these incidents. Unfortunately, and what I was telling my students was, we live in a day and age where emotion is driving everything. And it's not necessarily about the truth. People are going to believe what they want to believe, regardless of the evidence that we put in their face. And we're seeing this play out in real time. time, where you still have Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib still pushing the phony narrative that Israel was behind the hospital bombing, even though it's been thoroughly debunked at this point. And if we have Congresswomen going around saying that this is true, even though we have evidence that it's not, well, this influences the student body. There are many that actually follow Rashida Tlaib. And so what she says actually matters. Unfortunately, we're devoid of truth. And our failure of an education system has led to a problem where students can't think critically, where they don't have the ability to use reason and logic. And quite frankly, they're lacking common sense as well. That's why they can't even sit there and condemn Hamas when they get into these activities. But I think the scariest thing of all is that the anti-Israel, anti-Semitic statements we're seeing, you don't need foreign governments to pay professors to say these things. This is what they truly believe. And that's the frightening thing, because they're putting these views in front of the students. And it's not about debate and dialogue. It's about indoctrination. They're trying to push off these beliefs as if they're facts. And you're creating an entire extremist generation. Now, what is this generation going to do once they graduate? Well, they're going to become the policymakers, and they'll become the lawyers. And so this agenda has to be stopped now, and we should have been paying attention to it decades ago.
We should have.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back in the day when I was in college, you know, there was a culture of rebellion and renegade, and you wanted to go against the power of the machine, and it seems like they are just right in line with it nowadays. Nicholas, we are so grateful for your time, as always. Appreciate you being here, sir.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.